Natural disasters are terrifying. You run the risk of having your home and personal belongings destroyed, and there is no guarantee regarding the safety of you or your family. During weather events, pets and animals have the potential to be in even more trouble than the people who love them. Many dogs are strays who roam the streets, and without a safe space to go during a storm, they're in immense danger. For one Bahamian dog, the struggle to survive after a massive storm was difficult, but he fought against the water and wind, determined to save his own life. August through October, the entire southeastern United States is on edge. Hurricane season has coastal dwellers checking the local news around the clock, anticipating the arrival of various swirling storms sure to bring calamity. Usually, there's ample time to prepare your homes and families for even the most powerful of storms. Modern weather technology can provide you the insight you need to prepare or even evacuate if necessary. Not everyone is so fortunate though, because the damage from hurricanes is detrimental, especially for animals who don't have homes. In a perfect world, every dog would have a home. Sadly, in any storm, hundreds of dogs are left to fend for themselves in extreme conditions. When Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas and Florida, the hugely powerful storm devastated the lives of many. Billions in dollars of damage left people in Florida and the Caribbean homeless and scrambling to get back on their feet. Special teams of rescuers were sent out to find missing animals in the piles of debris created from ruined buildings and fallen trees. In some cases, animals are found within days of being lost and are returned to safety. Others are not so lucky. In the weeks following Dorian, many rescue efforts began to slow. However, new technology aided enormously in the successful recovery of so many animals. According to Lori Simmons of Big Dog Ranch Rescue, drones with thermal cameras play a crucial role. Drones offer an expansive overhead view of disaster sites and cover more ground more quickly than anything tool before. This leads to many more animal and human lives being saved. Even when using drones, it can take a long time to locate everyone lost. This was the case for one specific dog from Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas. The area received staggering damage from Hurricane Dorian. Buildings and homes were completely leveled, some flooded all the way up to the second or third story. With an almost destroyed power grid and no running water, the community was left in utter shambles immediately following Dorian's almost 200-mile-per-hour winds. Rescuers swarmed the island in order to recover the lost. In the first 30 days after the storm, hundreds of dogs were uncovered by various animal advocate groups. Some were happily reunited with owners while stray dogs were transported to facilities across the U.S. where they would be adopted out. Just as rescue efforts began to calm down, about a month following the most powerful storm on record to hit the Bahamas, an important discovery was made by Big Dog Ranch Rescue. Trapped beneath an air conditioning unit was an emaciated dog. The puppy had been stuck under the heavy appliance for at least 30 days. Rescuers could not believe that this animal was still alive after a month without food. They knew rainwater had been the only thing keeping him alive. Chase Scott of Big Dog Ranch Rescue described the one-year-old mixed breed pup as being skeleton thin and unable to walk. The animal was almost crushed when the building collapsed, but miraculously survived the ordeal. Even in his horrendous condition, the puppy greeted rescuers with a wagging tail. The team of workers immediately offered the canine some food and fresh water before carefully extracting him from his dire situation. He wasn't yet out of the woods. Big Dog Ranch Rescue dubbed the pup Miracle, as it was clearly miraculous that he was alive after what he had been through. Once examined, healthcare providers diagnosed him with stomach problems, parasites, and significant muscle atrophy. But that wasn't all. In addition to those injuries, he sustained cuts and abrasions on his mouth from attempting to chew his way out of the rubble. The harrowing image of a defenseless puppy in the worst situation imaginable had rescue workers giving him extra love and attention. His atrophied muscles required him to have daily massages as he learned to walk once again. Scott cited Miracle's strength as a huge asset to his journey to recovery. Miracle is a fighter and a hero, and we know he will win this latest battle, he said. Since being found, Miracle steadily gained his strength back and recovered from his ailments under the close watch of veterinary care providers. Because no owners had claimed him, however, the organization was still searching for a forever home. Miracle was one of over 100 dogs rescued by Big Dog Ranch following Hurricane Dorian. Though the organization can't find homes for every lost dog, volunteers are trying their best. Plus, they have help from all over the world. In 2014, war erupted in Ukraine. Pro-Russia forces clashed with Ukrainian troops in a battle for the heart and soul of the nation. Citizens were displaced, and unfortunately, as they had been in Hurricane Dorian, pets were abandoned. With nowhere to turn, dogs took to the streets, scavenging what they could and avoiding the ever-growing wolf populations. While the humans fought with firepower, the animals were left fighting for survival. In June 2019, rescue workers for Happy Animals, a Ukrainian nonprofit located in the city Mariupol, which sits along the Sea of Azov just a stone's throw from Russia, came across a dog that'd seen his fair share of street-based horrors. There was no way to identify him. He had no tags or microchip. And if rescuers were being honest, he looked terrible. Emaciated and covered in mange, they figured this pooch's best days were most definitely behind him. But the organization called itself Happy Animals for a reason. Determined to make him feel like a champ, workers considered putting the pooch's photo on Facebook and seeing if someone might claim him. They had doubts though. For one, he was really old. The organization knew geezer dogs don't get adopted as easily as the strapping young pups, and this guy's rough condition didn't exactly forecast a lifetime of backyard fun time. Nevertheless, they threw the dog's picture up on Facebook with a few details about him. It couldn't hurt. However, once the post had a few hours to marinate online, rescue workers were stunned by the results. Thousands of people shared his photo. Perhaps Ukrainians, so fed up with war and fighting, connected with the battered dog on a subconscious level. Sympathetic Facebook users noted they were drawn to the dog's pain-filled eyes. Incredibly, the Facebook message reached users all the way in Australia, one of which thought the dog looked oddly familiar to a family friends in Ukraine. Not one to let homeless dogs lie, the Australian contacted her friend in Europe. When the message reached the Ukrainian woman, it must have dug up some long-buried emotions like an old bone. Because 2 years earlier in 2017, she'd had a dog that looked like the one in the photo, but she hadn't seen him since. See, back then, someone had stolen her beloved dog named Lord right out of her backyard. She posted photos of her lost dog in every Facebook group that would allow it. She never received one response. So in 2019, she was dumbfounded when she saw a dog that looked awfully familiar on her computer screen. But after 2 years, she figured there was no way this could be Lord. She'd already made peace with his absence. Hope finally got the best of her, however, so she reached out to Happy Animals. The organization, stunned that their Facebook message actually found traction, set up a meeting between the possible former friends at the shelter. The next morning, the woman headed over to the shelter, and when she stepped into the facilities, she saw the dog chained up in the yard. But when the dog shied away from her as she approached, she grew concerned this wasn't Lord. Moments later, though, it seemed memories and familiar smells came flooding back to the pooch because he started taking happy steps. Then he started prancing and shaking. Then he went absolutely nuts. After 2 years' absence, a fatigued Lord found the strength to jump into the waiting arms of the woman who'd taken care of him for so long. He let his tongue fly, indiscriminately licking whatever part of his best friend's face that he could. And at the reunion's crescendo, Lord and his friend embraced in a very human, very real hug. Lord's owner wept, relieved and elated her dog was finally coming home where he belonged. There wasn't a dry eye in the shelter. The reunion, the shelter later wrote, was nothing short of a miracle, and the entire staff embraced tears of joy as they watched Lord get crazy happy. Just 2 days before, they'd all but written the dog off as a lost cause, destined to stay in the kennels forever. We thank everyone who shared our post, the shelter wrote on Facebook. It's thanks to you that the dog's life was saved and peace returned to his owner's soul. Rescuers knew finding a lost pet's home was usually a team effort. This actually tends to be the case for most lost animals. Communities must come together to find their homes. In fact, a watchful neighbor helped a young man thousands of miles from Lord get one step closer to reuniting with his beloved kitten. See, John Gulla was craving both responsibility and love one day in 2012, so he followed in the footsteps of so many young adults before him and went searching for the perfect pet. When he saw two cats, Julie and her brother Jack, John knew he'd found the perfect pair. He brought the two home and let them run hog wild around his place. The kittens cuddled together. They played together. They were a delight. This made it particularly painful when, shortly after the adoption, John had to leave Julie and Jack with his mother. He was off to college and wasn't into the idea of hiding cats in his dorm room. John's mother, Lorinda, welcomed the kittens into her abode because, come on, who wouldn't? Julie had a little white spot on her fur that made her just so darn cute, but Lorinda's joy in living with the two kittens was unexpectedly cut short. Being that she was a cat and prone to bizarre fits of panic, Julie took off running one day. She just scooted out the door and headed down the street. I couldn't find her, Lorinda recalled. I was just beside myself. Devastated by the breakup of his dynamic kitten duo, John teamed up with his mom to find the missing feline. They wandered the neighborhood, hanging up posters, jingling bags of cat treats, and calling Julie. Frantic searches for the cat halted, however, when doctors diagnosed John with lymphoma. With a fight for his life now ahead of him, he could no longer focus on the cat he so dearly loved. 6 years passed. John beat cancer, married his longtime girlfriend, found a new job, and set up shop in Indianapolis, 25 miles away from his old home in Carmel. Things were looking up, but he never stopped thinking about Julie. Perhaps it was for that reason his mother was browsing Paw Boost Lost and Found Pets, a page on Facebook dedicated to reuniting pet owners with, well, their lost pets. A certain post on it piqued her interest. A woman named Christine McKeon wrote that she'd recently seen a cat under a shed in her backyard. The cat, she noted, was skittish and just a little bit mean. It didn't sound anything like Julie. Most concerning of all was that the post didn't mention the white spot on Julie's belly, which would have been a good detail to include, Lorinda thought, were someone trying to find this cat's owner. Still, even after 6 years, she, like John, was drawn to the idea that Julie was definitely still out there, looking for them. She knew they'd be kicking themselves for the rest of their lives if they didn't follow up with Christine. So John made the drive, white-knuckle clenching the steering wheel in anticipation. In less than half an hour, he arrived at Christine's house and stood before the shed a mean, stray black cat called home. With every ounce of love he could muster, just as he and his mother had done 6 years before in the streets of suburbia, John called Julie's name, and nothing happened. But understanding that cats are cats and don't really come when you call them, John gave it another go. Julie, he called, Julie. Then, two glowing eyes peeked out at John from the darkness beneath the shed. John in her sights, the cat once called mean and skittish emerged. She came out running from under the shed. Christine recalled, like, oh hey, I know this guy. Soon she was face to face with John. And then she started purring like a lawnmower engine. She rubbed against John's legs, and after he bent down to pick her up, she crawled right up onto his shoulders. Still, John needed to be convinced this was his Julie. I turned her around, and I said, did she have a white spot? John explained. The folks gathered around confirmed. She has a white spot on her stomach. John couldn't believe it. After 6 years, he finally found his cat. In that moment of reunion, John pet Julie and noticed her fur was surprisingly well kept. To him, it meant that she only recently moved in under the shed. Someone had been taking care of her over the years. Delighted to have his cat back, John looked forward to another reunion, Julie and Jack's. Would the siblings even remember the short time they spent together? Would they get along? All of John's anxieties melted away, however, when he put Julie down beside Jack for the first time. The two went right back to their old tricks, running around and playing together. John was overwhelmed. It's almost like seeing a ghost or something, he said of seeing Julie in his home. Still, this was one ghost John was happy to have haunt his house. John couldn't help but be thankful to whoever cared for Julie over those 6 years. There wasn't a chance in the world she would have made it on her own over that time. Oddly though, some animals do prove surprisingly self-sufficient on their own. In November of 2018, for instance, when one of the most destructive wildfires in California history ripped through the Golden State, people were forced to make tough choices. Animals were too. For Andrea Gaylord, the decision to abandon the home that had been in her family for 10 generations was one of the hardest she'd ever made. But even as she watched as the century-old home went up in flames, something else made her heart ache more. As the campfire made its way through paradise, Andrea's guard dogs, Madison and Miguel, had taken off and vanished without a trace. Though she and her husband had searched tirelessly for their beloved pets, the encroaching blaze forced the couple to flee, leaving the fate of the dogs unknown. Andrea and her husband fled to a nearby shelter, where, alongside hundreds of other evacuees, they waited for the fire to be extinguished. All the while, thoughts of Madison and Miguel never left her mind. Finally, after 17 days of non-stop firefighting, the raging campfire blaze was contained. Like her fellow Paradise residents, Andrea was eager to return home, hoping somehow her dogs had survived. But when she and her husband attempted to leave the shelter, they were told that Paradise was still too unsafe to return to. That's when she contacted Shayla Sullivan of K9 Paw Print Rescue, who had actively been rescuing lost pets from areas affected by the campfire. After learning of the situation, Shayla vowed to do whatever she could to reunite Andrea with Madison and Miguel. However, as soon as Shayla began her search, she received word of a dog matching Madison's and Miguel's descriptions wandering through the small city of Citrus Heights near Sacramento. The city was 85 miles south of Paradise. Shayla drove down there, and when she arrived, she was stunned to find the dog described to her was, in fact, Miguel. Unbelievably, the dog had traveled from Andrea's home in Paradise and had been picked up by another local rescue organization. Andrea was overjoyed when she heard the news about Miguel, but Shayla wasn't satisfied with finding just one of the two pooches. And so, loading up her car once more, Shayla headed for Paradise. The roads were barely navigable as Shayla made her way through the once vibrant town, a graveyard of charred homes and vehicles peering out at her from beneath the ashes of burnt treetops. Forget dogs for a second. With so much destruction, was it possible anything could have survived out here? Upon reaching Andrea's burned-down property, however, Shayla got her answer. As she surveyed the scorched earth, Shayla noticed movement in the pile of rubble that was once the 100-year-old home. She approached, her heart beating wildly. It was Madison. Apparently, the faithful guard dog had returned after the fire had been extinguished and was now sitting watch of his former home. But even with the dog alive and well, there was still one challenge that Shayla would have to face. Being that Madison was no lover of strangers, the wary dog immediately took off when Shayla approached him. Some guard dog. Shayla knew if she wasn't able to catch Madison, the dog would surely perish from a lack of food and water. Shayla needed a plan. So after leaving some fresh water and a bowl of food out for Madison, Shayla returned to Andrea to share the good news and relay her difficulty in catching him. The pair was stumped over the predicament but devised the perfect method for luring the protective pup back home. Using an article of Andrea's clothing, Shayla used the smell to calm Madison and draw her back to the property. And when the guard dog returned, he found his owners and brother waiting there for him. The tearful reunion was marked by excited licks and yelps from Madison, who was then fed a hefty bag of his favorite treat, wheat thins. Even in the face of catastrophe, Madison stayed loyal to his family and protected the home at all costs. In all the destruction, this loyalty was not lost on Andrea. "You were the best dog," she told Madison through joyful tears. "The best."